The Civil War demonstrates really our first modern war. It uses both old and new methods of war. Old methods being the cavalry, okay, people on foot and on horseback, muzzle rifles, which were the sort of classic weapon, battlefield formation, that is, soldiers lining up in traditional formations on the battlefield. New technologies are represented by things like railroads, telegraphs, submarines, armored ships, and observation balloons. So we see this improvement in communications and transportation. The strategy for the Union side was very well known, kind of famous, and it was called the Anaconda Plan. It was developed by someone named Winfield Scott, and it had three parts to it. The first part was to blockade the southern ports, and you can see in the picture on your right, there's a snake there, and at the head you can see it has the stars and stripes of the United States flag. And the snake weaves its way around the coast of the United States, blockading ports in the south. Okay, so that's the first part of the plan. The second part of the plan was to split the South in two at the Mississippi River. Of course, you can see the Mississippi River where it comes out in the bottom of the picture and runs kind of right up the middle of the United States between Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Tennessee. Their idea was that if they could create a barrier there, they would be able to divide the South and therefore weaken it. The third part of their plan was to capture the Confederate States of America capital, which was in Richmond, Virginia. That's where the snake's tail is there, wrapped around the American flag. That was the third part of the plan, to capture the capital of the Confederate States. The strategy for the Confederacy, or the CSA, was a little bit different. They weren't quite as organized. To begin with, they were fighting a defensive battle. The battle was defensive because they were defending their own turf, their own territory. Basically, the Union was trying to force southern states to remain part of the Union and give up slavery. So they were the ones defending themselves. They asked for Europe to help them, both Britain and France, and both countries refused. In the next two slides, we'll talk about the advantages that each side had. In terms of the Union, one of the most critical things that the Union had going for it was that it had most of the population. In other words, more people lived in the North than in the South. So higher numbers of people mean that they are able to recruit more troops. They also have large advantages in terms of resources. They have more money and more supplies, access to more supplies. They also have most of the transportation. The northern states had more roads and railroads than the South, and they're able to transport goods from their factories and distribute them all over the northern states. The Confederacy has a few advantages too. First of all, they're on the defense. They're defending their homes, so they're fighting with more emotion, and they also know the land very well, the various land structures, and the climate. Southerners also have a very strong sectional pride. You may have noticed this in some parts of the South. They also have a better military tradition and leadership with very well-trained generals. Both sides had to increase central government powers because both sides had to raise an army, meaning they had to recruit volunteers and also eventually draft men for their armies. They also had to equip their armies, provide them with weapons, food, clothing, etc. And they had to come up with money for the war. So they had to raise funds to support the war. And lastly, they also had to suppress any opposition to the war, particularly in the North, where they had what were nicknamed the Copperheads. And these were Northern Democrats that supported slavery and opposed the war, particularly the Union positions in the war. In the North, because of their high populations, they were able to just recruit volunteers at first. They had many volunteers, but eventually they needed to start a draft, and this is also called a conscription. The draft caused a lot of controversy, and there were actually riots in New York City over the draft. For people who avoided the draft, bounty hunters were sent after them. Bounties were paid to return people who had avoided the draft. And the other very controversial issue regarding the draft was that wealthy people could pay someone to take their place. This was substitution. Okay, you could basically hire a sub to go in your position if you had enough money. Of course, this option was really only available to the wealthy, making it very controversial. In terms of supplying the armies with clothing, food, and basic necessity, the Union had several advantages. First of all, they had industrial capacity. They could convert their factories, their industries, over to making wartime goods. They also had good transportation networks, and the financial centers of the nation were mostly in the North. The Confederacy had problems in this regard. They did not have access to supplies the way the North did, and the armies were often forced to forage the land for food, just sort of scrounge up whatever they could get, and they often faced shortages of food and supplies. Okay, and now we're ready to move on to the last video in this presentation.